The night was quiet, save for the low groan of the wind pulling at the cabin boards, a hollow sound like a voice too tired to speak. Clara May Whitfield leaned close to the fire, coaxing what little flame she could from the dwindling wood. The embers glowed against her face, painting the lines of weariness carved there by years of scraping through days with too little food, too little rest, too little kindness. Behind her, the children slept on the pallet, bundled in patch blankets. Eli, 12 years old and too solemn for his age, had an arm thrown over his sister. Sarah Jane, barely 8, clung to him, even in sleep, as if he could guard her against the long hunger of the world. Clara tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought she heard something, distant, uneven, like hoofbeats swallowed by dust. At first, she dismissed it as the ache of her own mind, playing tricks when the night grew long. But then it came again, the heavy stumble of a horse, the thud of a body giving way. She rose, lifted the lantern from its hook, and stepped out into the night. The moon wore a thin veil of cloud, its light hazy across the dry ground. Clara's bare feet brushed dust and broken twigs as she walked toward the sound. Her heart stuttered when she saw him. A man collapsed near the fence line, his horse standing restless nearby. Blood darkened his shirt, glistening wet against the dirt. She froze, lantern trembling in her hand. A stranger, half dead, sprawled so close to her fragile home. Every tale of danger pressed in her mind. Outlaws, drunken men, men who took without asking. She turned, almost ready to walk back and bolt the door. Then she heard it, the faintest rasp of a breath, words carried on the edge of death. Help! Lord, help! Clara's chest tightened. She should have walked away, should have chosen safety over mercy. Yet something stronger than fear tugged at her, an old voice from her mother long gone. Never leave a soul to die if your hands can reach them. She lowered the lantern, and her shadow stretched over the man. Mama. Eli's voice came from the doorway, shaky with sleep. The boy had followed, holding his sister's hand. Sarah Jane clutched the wood frame, her eyes wide as she peered at the figure on the ground. Go inside, Clara whispered, her voice sharp with warning. But he's dying, Sarah Jane cried softly, tugging at her brother's sleeve. Mama, we can't just leave him. Clara stood still, torn in two. To bring him inside was to invite trouble, to stir the whispers of a town already certain she was cursed. But to leave him here, that thought pressed heavy as a stone upon her soul. She dropped to her knees beside him, lantern light showing a man weathered by years of sun and storm. His face was pale under the dust, his lips cracked, his breath shallow. He smelled of leather, sweat, and blood. Please, he murmured again, eyes fluttering open just enough to reveal a glint of gray. His voice cracked like dry earth. Don't leave me here. Clara's throat tightened. She reached out with steady hands, though her heart beat hard enough to break. Eli, help me lift him. Together, mother and son strained against the weight, dragging the man toward the cabin. His boots scraped along the dirt, leaving a trail like a dark scar on the ground. Sarah Jane ran ahead, opening the door wide. Inside, the air filled with the smell of wood smoke and sickness. They laid him near the fire, his chest heaving raggedly. Clara pulled a rag from the shelf, dipped it into their small bowl of water, and pressed it against the wound in his side. Blood seeped through at once, warm and sticky against her fingers. She swallowed hard, pushing down the tremor of fear. She had seen death before, the day her husband's body was brought from the mine, covered in soot, cold as stone. She knew the weight of it, knew how it settled in a room like a shadow that never left. She would not let it claim another life under her roof. Sarah Jane brought a chipped tin cup, water sloshing inside. Here, Mama. The man's lips barely parted, but he drank, water slipping down his chin. He tried to speak, voice breaking into fragments. Jed, Boone, land gun. His words fell into silence as his eyes rolled back. Clara pressed her palm against his forehead, burning with fever. She shook her head, whispering to no one and everyone, Lord help me. What have I done? She knew the Boone name. Everyone in town did. Jedediah Boone, the wealthy rancher, proud and untouchable, whispered about as a man with too much land and too many enemies. For him to be lying here, bleeding on her floor, was to invite a storm she could not weather. But when she looked at her children, she saw the spark of something she could not deny. Eli's brow furrowed with determination, Sarah Jane's small hands clutching the cup with a kind of fierce hope. "Mama," Eli said, voice firm though still a boy's. "If you send him out, he'll die. We can't let that happen." Clara closed her eyes. She thought of Martha Calloway's sharp tongue, the way folks turned their faces when she walked into town. They already called her cursed, blamed her husband's death on bad luck she carried like a shadow. To take a man under her roof, a boon of all names, would turn whispers into open scorn. But Clara may have lived long enough to know that sometimes shame was lighter to bear than guilt. She dipped the rag again, wrung it out, and laid it against Jed Boone's wound. The hours stretched long. Each time his breath faltered, she pressed harder, whispering prayers she barely remembered. Eli fetched wood for the fire. Sarah Jane hummed a lullaby, as if her voice could hold him to the earth. When dawn broke, pale light spilling across the cabin walls, Clara was still by his side, eyes burning with sleeplessness. She had kept him tethered to life by sheer will. His chest rose, shallow but steady. That was when the knock came. The door creaked open, and Sheriff Amos Pike stepped inside, his hat low over his eyes. His gaze swept the room, lingered on the man by the fire. His mouth tightened. "Clara May," he said, voice even but heavy. "You've got trouble under your roof." Clara stood, her hands bloodied, her body shaking but her spine unbent. "He's half dead, Amos. Trouble or not, I couldn't leave him." The sheriff sighed, his eyes narrowing with a kind of weary understanding. "You'll have the whole town against you, you know that." Clara looked down at Jed Boone, then at her children watching from the pallet. She lifted her chin, voice quiet but steady. "Better the town against me than God himself." The sheriff tipped his hat, lingering a moment before stepping back out into the rising light. Clara closed the door, heart heavy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt she had chosen the right road, no matter how hard it might be to walk. Days stretched into one another, each marked by the faint rise and fall of Jed Boone's chest and the sound of Clara's steady hands working to keep him tethered to the living. The fever came like a storm, sweat soaking his shirt, his breath ragged as though pulled from the depths of a well. Clara brewed willow bark, pressed cool cloths against his skin, whispered words she hadn't spoken aloud in years. The children watched, hushed, learning what mercy looked like in silence. By the third morning, Jed's eyes opened long enough to hold hers. Gray eyes, dulled by suffering, studied Clara with something that was not pride, not gratitude, but a recognition of being seen. He tried to sit, grimaced, then fell back against the pillow. "Why?" His voice cracked like brittle wood. "Why help me?" Clara dipped the rag into water again, her movements practiced, gentle. "Because no one deserves to die alone in the dirt." He stared at the low fire, lips trembling with words he didn't give. And in that space between them, a quiet thread was spun. Not love, not yet, but the fragile beginning of something more enduring than fear. The town, however, was less forgiving. Martha Calloway's sharp tongue struck first. By week's end, whispers curled through the streets like smoke. "The widow's got a man under her roof," she sneered at the mercantile. "A boon, no less. Makes you wonder what she's doing to keep him warm at night." Laughter followed her words, cruel and cutting. Eli heard it while carrying flour back from town, his small fists clenching, jaw tight. By the time he returned to the cabin, his eyes carried the weight of a man much older than 12. Clara listened, her face still, her hands steady as she kneaded bread. She had grown used to being the object of whispers, but now those barbs reached her children. She wanted to storm into town, to tell them mercy was not sin. Instead, she chose silence, for dignity sometimes shone brighter than fury. Jed, regaining his strength, felt the sting of it as well. He rose one morning against Clara's protests, took an axe, and split wood in the yard. His body trembled with the effort, but he did not stop. "If they're going to speak of me as a burden," he rasped, sweat glistening on his brow, "I'll not give them reason." Later that evening, Sarah Jane found her broken doll where it had been forgotten for weeks. When she picked it up, she gasped. The missing arm had been mended with leather stitched carefully into place, A small scrap Jed must have cut from his own saddlebag. She held it close, her eyes bright. Clara saw it and said nothing, but in her chest something shifted, like thawed ground after a long winter. But shadows were not done gathering. Silas Boone arrived under the cover of dusk, riding into town with a grin like a knife. He was Jed's younger brother, though bitterness had carved his face into something crueler. His voice carried through the saloon as he declared Jed finished, half dead, unfit to run the ranch. "The Boone land is mine," Silas spat, and more than a few men nodded, tempted by promises of work and coin. The news reached the cabin quickly. Sheriff Amos Pike rode out, his horse kicking up dust. He dismounted at Clara's door, his eyes grave. "Silas is making claims," he warned. "He'll come looking for papers, signatures, or blood. You best be ready." That night, the cabin seemed smaller, the lantern light trembling against the walls. Jed sat upright, pale but resolute, as Clara bandaged his side again. "You don't have to face him," she whispered. Jed's jaw tightened. "I've run from too much already. If I let Silas steal what's mine, then your kindness was wasted." When Silas came, he came with fury. He pounded on the door, shouting, "Jed, sign it all over. The ranch, the stock. You're done, brother. Don't make me take it by force." Clara's hands shook as she stood between the door and her children. Eli had taken Sarah Jane behind the hearth, his arms wrapped tight around her shoulders. Jed struggled to his feet, leaning on the wall, his face ghost pale but eyes burning. "You'll get nothing from me, Silas." The door burst inward, lantern light catching the sneer on Silas's face. He raised his gun, the metal gleaming like cold fire. Clara's heart leapt to her throat. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her body shielding the children. "If you want to shoot, you'll do it through me," she said, her voice low, trembling but unyielding. For a breath, time froze. The crackle of the fire, the shallow gasp of Jed's breath, Sarah Jane's muffled sob. Silas's finger twitched on the trigger. Then came another sound, the hard click of a revolver behind him. Sheriff Pike's voice, calm and iron-strong. "Put it down, Silas, or you won't walk out of here breathing." Silas hesitated, fury twisting his face. At last, he spat on the floorboards and lowered the gun. "Rot, the both of you," he snarled before storming into the night. Silence filled the cabin, heavy but unbroken. Jed sank back against the wall, his strength spent. Clara closed her eyes, her hands trembling only once the danger was gone. She looked at her children, at Jed, at the sheriff who gave a slow nod before slipping back into the night. And in that moment, she realized she had chosen rightly. Not just mercy, but courage. In the weeks that followed, Jed's strength returned. He worked alongside Eli, mended fences, rode out to check the land. Clara saw the pride in her son's eyes, the laughter returning to Sarah Jane's voice. Jed spoke little of thanks, but his actions wove it into every corner of their days. One afternoon, he came to Clara with papers in his hand. "This is for you," he said, placing the deed upon the table. "Half the ranch, half the stock. Your children's future secured." Clara's breath caught. "I can't take this. It's not mine." Jed shook his head. "You gave me life when I had none left. This is no gift, it's justice." She tried to push the papers back, but his hand covered hers, rough and warm. Their eyes met, and in that quiet stillness, no words were needed. Something had taken root between them, slow, unspoken, steady as the earth beneath their feet. The cabin, once hollow with grief, filled with the sound of wood being chopped, water being carried, laughter threading through the evenings. Clara found herself smiling again, a rare thing, as Jed bent to mend a latch or Sarah Jane's giggle carried through the door. And one evening, as the sun bled its last gold across the horizon, Clara stood on the porch, watching Jed lift Sarah Jane into the air, her laughter rising into the twilight. Eli leaned against the rail, eyes bright, no longer burdened with the weight of despair. Clara pressed her hand to her heart and felt a warmth that had been absent for so long. Narrator's voice, soft and steady as a closing prayer. It was not wealth that saved them, nor land, nor the promise of silver. It was mercy, freely given when the world turned its back. Remember this, dear soul. Sometimes the poorest home can hold the richest treasure, if only we dare to open the door.